Welcome to the Bitcoin Beat with Shaun and Jeff. I'm Shaun, this is my co-host Jeff, and I guess I'm done. I'm gonna need to sell all my Bitcoin. If Saylor's selling his Bitcoin, so am I. It was a good ride.
It's all over, Shaun. We got to get rid of these shirts and just pack it up.
Yeah, we totally did not plan that, did we? But we're in unison. We're kind of in mourning, so we want to celebrate the Bar Satoshi shirt look while we are still in Bitcoin for one more day. No, in
Yeah,
reality, though.
it's going to zero.
In reality, they have some reasons for talking about it. But first, before we jump into that, what I want to do is mention their purchase that they had last week. So they had bought in 535 Bitcoin over the course of last week, which sounds like it's not much compared to some of the previous weeks we've been talking about, but it's still $43 million worth. So it's quite a bit. It does bring their average down. So in 2026, they've bought in 146,369 Bitcoin. So that brings their weekly average over the last 18 weeks to 8,131 a week. So then when I do the math going forward, that means they'll hit their 1 million target on October 12th. So it's still something that they're trending for this year to hit a million. And of course, they're not going to stop there. They're going to continue to buy after that. But this isn't really what people are talking about. Crypto Twitter, so to speak, they're talking about Saylor going on the circuit, talking about selling Bitcoin. Have you had a chance to catch this? I know you've been on the road quite a bit. Did you see that Saylor had talked about why they would sell Bitcoin?
A little bit. I just kind of skimmed the surface. I haven't dug in too deep, but like a lot of things, I think there's some ambiguity and nuance here that people are missing.
Yeah, and I think the key takeaway, we'll get into some of the specifics on it here in a minute, but the key takeaway, I kind of agree with this post by the Assembly. It's a messaging change because for years, he's been known saying, you never sell your Bitcoin. Never sell your Bitcoin. And he'll get like standing ovations at the Bitcoin conference when he says that. Now he's saying, well, there's sometimes you'll sell Bitcoin. We're going to sell Bitcoin. So I think the messaging has definitely changed. It's most definitely a pivot. Now, they do talk about some reasons why, and they've kind of been, I wouldn't say like damage control managing it, but they've been talking about how they would do it. And to oversimplify it, what they would really be doing is they'd be taking some Bitcoin that they have at a high purchase price, selling it when Bitcoin's lower, and if they're being a net buyer of Bitcoin, it's like they're buying it back right away. So what does that do for them? They get to count that loss as a capital gains loss and tax harvest that for benefits later in the year. And that's a tax benefit. There's no such thing as a wash sale in Bitcoin because Bitcoin's not considered a security. I know you have a little bit more familiarity with trading and whatnot. So that's kind of the messaging of what they're branding right now. And that's kind of what I see when I've dug into it.
Yeah, the tax loss harvesting idea makes sense. And to your point, since there's no wash sales on Bitcoin, you avoid that, that penalty that is accrued in the securities market when you do that. So I don't know. I think it is a messaging thing to your point. I also think that at times we're all guilty of making hyperbolic statements, and who knows? Maybe Saylor is just addressing the crowd and saying, "You never sell your Bitcoin," and he's not saying, "I never sell my Bitcoin." And it's good for him to have options. But here's the thing that I do believe: he will continually be a net buyer of Bitcoin. He will buy more Bitcoin than he sells Bitcoin. He will continue to have to put Bitcoin on his balance sheet because that's what investors in his products are demanding. So he is not going to be a net seller. He is going to continue to be a net buyer. So like a lot of things on X, I think sometimes it's interesting, but it gets blown out of proportion and people may be wondering, oh, is he going to sell all his Bitcoin? And that's probably not the case.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good take. And I agree with everything you said there. I think the messaging issues are a little bit of a concern, but him and Fong Li have been talking a lot lately about it. They've also been talking about a new pivot, not just what they're talking about for selling Bitcoin, but they've really been branching out into this DeFi narrative and tokenization. In fact, there's a Consensus, which is something I want to ask you about. You were over at Consensus. This is kind of their messaging now. They're really diving deep. In fact, Michael Saylor's tweets, his X account is filled with a bunch of DeFi reposts and stuff like that. So you just recently got back from Consensus. I know it's not really a Bitcoin conference, but it's something that all the people that we follow in Bitcoin are there. what were your initial thoughts on going to Consensus? And also, was that your first one, or have you been to other Consensus conferences
Yeah, that
before?
was my first Consensus. I've always kind of wanted to go because it is one of the biggest cryptocurrency conferences in the world. But this is my first one. It was great. I really enjoyed it. I would say definitely the suits are here, as you probably also experienced, as we experienced at the Bitcoin conference. The suits are here. Nobody at the conference was talking about retail coming back. The entire conversation was institutional. And that ties into a lot of different topics, like, for example, the Clarity Act. That was a big topic at Consensus. There's certainly urgency around getting the Clarity Act passed before this summer. Institutions want that. Money manager wants that. The regulatory window feels genuinely unprecedented right now with the Clarity Act, the Genius Act, the new CFTC chairman actively engaging with the industry. So this combination has never existed before, and the suits are here. The L1 debate, I think, is over. I didn't hear a lot of this Ethereum versus Solana conversation. I didn't see a lot of new L1s shilling the new L1 token or coin. There were a couple, but even the message that Anthony Pompliano presented, Kevin O'Leary, Mr. Wonderful from Shark Tank was there. The message was simply focus on Bitcoin and Ethereum. And if you kind of think about traditional investors, they look at like the market and it's like, okay, there's the Dow Jones and the S&P 500 index, right? That's what you concentrate your investments in. Unless you're specifically invested in an alternative investment vehicle, you want to focus on the pillars in this industry. So there was also a lot of talk about tokenization, which, kind of going back to your point on Saylor here, tokenization, I think, is something that is really a hype word and a buzzword, and everybody is talking about tokenizing everything. I really don't think that makes a lot of sense. I don't think there are things that you need to tokenize. Like, why create another abstract layer on top of something that already works? In my mind, tokenization is the ability to scale something, but there are no perfect solutions. There are only trade-offs, and the risk in tokenizing something is that you introduce exploits or vulnerabilities through centralization. So I don't know. I think one of the things that does make sense to tokenize are perhaps collectibles, like rare trading cards. I saw a use case of that made sense. In fact, Kevin O'Leary walked out on stage with a Michael Jordan rookie card that apparently he bought for like $12.5 million. That was up to $20 million. And then later on in the conference, I came across a company that was tokenizing those sorts of things on an open market. So I don't know. I enjoyed the conference. I thought it was put on really well. And I look forward to potentially going back again next year.
Interesting. Yeah, I think one of the few things I saw on the people I follow online is that discussion you talked about, how there's no real layer one dispute anymore. There's not a lot of degens or altcoins there saying we can do this better than Ethereum, we can do better than Solana, we're going to flip in this company or whatever, this token or whatever. So it almost feels like it's been more. I mean, this is probably a statement that's true of the Bitcoin conference too. It's more institutionalized. There's more big players, big money, traditional finance that are really focusing on the space now. That's interesting.
And they're not going to go chasing the next shiny object, right? They're not going to go chasing some unproven layer one. And that doesn't mean that other layer ones won't emerge and exist and solidify their place. It's just like, institutional capital isn't going to take that risk. They want a proven layer one. That's why it's Bitcoin first, and then whatever else they want to consider after that. And if you look at the digital asset treasury company space, it started with Bitcoin, right? These digital asset treasury companies weren't putting Ethereum on their balance sheet first. They were putting Bitcoin on their balance sheet. And then Tom Lee, he was a speaker there, and he actually talked about how they were going to stop accumulating as much Ethereum, which I thought was kind of interesting. I was like, okay, so maybe there's something going on there with Bitmain Miner and why they're not going to accumulate so much ETH, but we'll see.
It's interesting. I did see a tweet that I have kind of earmarked to follow up on. of him saying something to that effect about
Mm.
they're basically trying to be the strategy, but for Ethereum instead of Bitcoin, and they want to get to 5% of the entire, basically all the ETH that are out there. So I wonder if, unlike Saylor, he's not going to stop at 1 million Bitcoin. I wonder if Tom Lee and Bitmain are probably thinking they're going to stop at that 5%. I know they're doing a whole bunch of other ancillary things like staking, and they have a couple other moonshots that they're trying to invest in and whatnot. But, I guess the takeaway here, since we're a Bitcoin podcast, I'm curious, since you've been to both the Bitcoin conference and Consensus literally back to back. So, I mean, there's a pretty good comparison there. Do you think that Bitcoiners that want to, the type that go to the Bitcoin conference, people like me and others, would they get something from going to Consensus? Because I understand with your business too, there's a lot of other reasons why you'd want to be there. But what's your opinion on that? Would Bitcoiners find value in that? Now, before you answer, part of that is me speaking from a position of a lot of the Bitcoin people I follow boycotted the Bitcoin conference, yet they were at Consensus. So it was kind of a weird dynamic. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it all depends. If you're an open-minded Bitcoiner, right? If you're Bitcoin first and you're intellectually curious about what's going on in the cryptocurrency space, then yeah, you would get something out of Consensus. But if you're really a hardened Bitcoin maxi and it's Bitcoin only, you would be a good troll at the Consensus stage. So you'd probably actually find a lot of stuff to make fun of. But yeah, there's maybe somewhere in the middle there between that. But I think if the key is to put Bitcoin first, right? Understand that Bitcoin is significantly the most important layer one cryptocurrency. It's significantly the most important form of money that has ever been created. It's the most decentralized one. It has first mover advantage. All the properties that Bitcoin has, which are far superior to any other layer one. If you understand those principles and you put those principles first, I think you can go to Consensus with an open mind and be intellectually curious about what's happening in the space. I mean, come on, let's face it. If you're a Bitcoin maxi and you're Bitcoin only, but you still own shares of Apple, or you own real estate, or you own any other kind of investment vehicle, you own treasury bonds, whatever it be, are you really that much of a maxi?
There'll be other maxis saying you're not even close to being a maxi when you start comparing it, right?
Right. Totally.
Right. Well, I appreciate that take. I'm excited to hear a little bit more about that when we chat offline. Kind of pivoting back to because I've been thinking a lot about conferences lately. Didn't go to Consensus, but there's a couple other ones, and I mentioned them in our episode last week when you were on the road. We have the Bitcoin is for everyone up in Portland. That's coming up at the end of the month. There's a Midwest Summit, which I forgot to mention on the last pod, but that's coming up in Ohio. And then, next year we also have the Bitcoin conference in Nashville, but there's the BitBlock Boom. There's also this smaller one, Bitcoin Alpha, I think that's trying to start up again in Santa Monica. So there's a lot of things about conferences on my mind. So kind of pivoting back to the Bitcoin conference, one of the things that was really disappointing, and I didn't touch on this last week because I wanted to get kind of some of your input and your thoughts on it, was Kash Patel coming to speak. And his talk, when it was talking about basically freedom, it's like freedom to code, not being persecuted by, hostile administrations. And yet, while he's speaking to an almost empty crowd, there was the fact that Keonne and Bill from the Samourai Wallet developers, they're still sitting in prison while he's speaking about freedom to code. And it can't get much more hypocritical than that. And it was really disappointing because I had mentioned this to you when we were talking about this before the conference. It kind of was a lose-lose situation for them.
Yeah.
In my mind, one of two things was going to happen. They were either going to wait until the conference to give him a pardon, which means they were going to let him sit in prison just for the publicity of saying, oh, we're going to pardon him right now, which would have been a bad take. It would have been a bad look. Or worse, they didn't pardon him and they just placated and gaslit the entire crowd saying that they believe in freedom while they keep these guys in prison. And unfortunately, as of today, they're still in prison. So I don't know what your any thoughts you have to add or your takes to any of that.
Free the Samourai Wallet developers now. I'm actually starting to align more with what Jack Mallers says, which is voting is a humiliation ritual. I don't think if the Samourai Wallet developers aren't out of prison now, I don't think I'm going to vote for. I will vote for the party. Let's put it this way. I'm a Bitcoiner first. whoever has the best policies to support Bitcoin development, I will vote for that party, period. And if you don't, then I won't vote at all, because I feel like I'm participating in some sort of humiliation ritual. I've come around to this idea. I voted for Trump. I've voted for Trump the last 3 times. If the Republican Party can't get their shit together, they can go F themselves. Same with the Democrat Party. I mean, I'm very tired of this too, Shaun. It is hypocritical.
Yeah.
It's very hypocritical.
Yeah, it's really disgusting too, because ultimately the charges there's differences in both cases, but the charges are extremely similar to the same reason that CZ from Binance got charged. And he had about 4 months in prison and basically got to pay a huge fine and is able to try to live his life like normal now, while these guys have no prospect of getting out. In fact, there was Keonne's message here. Let me share it here. This is a letter from prison that he wrote, and it's kind of gut wrenching when you realize that whatever hope they had, how you and I were talking casually about what might happen when Cash talks about this guy's thinking about his life and his family, and he says this one sentence here: there was some hope during the Bitcoin 2026 conference, but now that hope is come and gone, and one must come to terms with the fact that I'm simply a federal prisoner without money, power, or influence, and will serve his whole sentence. And not giving any kind of shade against CZ, he had money, power, and influence, and it worked to his advantage. And unfortunately, these guys have nothing, and they have zero hope going forward, at least from how much hope they had leading into the conference that was going to be the moment. And I'm with you. It's something that I am a little bit disappointed that Kash Patel didn't get booed off the stage. It's interesting that he was, and there's a lot of reasons to complain about Bitcoin Magazine and Inc. and how they run the conference. So I don't want to keep piling it on, but the fact that they were allowed to speak and it didn't even address the fact that they were still sitting in prison was something that was a very sour taste, and something that needs to be corrected immediately. So I agree with you on all that. In fact, one other note, and this is for our viewers too as well, but you, Jeff, with you being busy and on the road, I know you follow Bitcoin Today quite a bit. And they had Thursday an episode, and I'll post this link in the description so you and viewers can listen to it. But this is a really interesting space where they focused a lot on Keonne and Bill and the Samourai Wallet case. And they had Keonne's wife, I think, was on there. Larry Lepard came on there and spoke. Jeff Booth came on, started talking about it. Both of them were talking about things that they can do to use their influence to try to make sure that it's at least recognizable. It's something that's not forgotten about. Like, it didn't happen at the conference, but we need to still keep fighting for it. It's a lengthy conversation. It's 2 hours long, but if you got time to put that on the background, I know we talk about how we listen to it and how sometimes we'll be on stage, but it's something that if you have some time to listen to it, listen to what people are saying in the space. And there's ways that they talk about in there how you can help and support them, not only with donations, but how you can bring up the fight, talking about t-shirts and messaging and any conference you go to keep them in your thoughts and to bring it up to everybody you talk to.
Right. Yeah. And I think the key point is, like, code is speech, and our Constitution protects speech. Privacy is also one of our fundamental rights. So it seems like we're losing those quickly. And I'll just add one thing here, which is Bitcoiners have a way of fighting among themselves. And one of the things that I'm also incredibly disappointed in was the fact that last year, the Bitcoin community spent more time arguing about the core versus knots debate, which is a pointless, purposeless debate at the end of the day. When you go down the logical, pathway to what this is actually going to resolve, it ends in a hard fork, period. So there was so much energy spent on that debate. And I think the consequence of that, the unintended consequence, was that the Samourai Wallet developers didn't get as much attention as they deserved from the Bitcoin community, myself included, perhaps. I'm not innocent by any means. I did sign the petition, right, to free the Samourai Wallet developers. I was pretty vocal about that when it was going on, but I think we are taking this time right now and this platform that we have right here to highlight these things in order to, let's just even talking about this is a potential risk, right? And I think people are, one of the greatest sins of mankind is fear, right? When you're afraid, you are actually hurting yourself, right? Don't act out of fear. And I think a lot of people didn't want to step up or say anything because they were afraid of the repercussions or the blowback or who might come after them.
Our friend Puncher from up north was mentioning on that Bitcoin Today, the goal of that fear is self-censorship. They don't need to tell us to not say anything. But that fear makes us be careful about what we say and maybe not speak up, to your point. Exactly. And
yes,
I will second, you and I, we discuss our differences with core and knots, and it's a fun discussion to have. But it's not what's real. And what's real is somebody sitting in prison. They're away from their family right now because of just writing code. So I'm with you on that. That's something that we'll keep revisiting. And I do think it's important. So we're it's not something we're going to forget about either. So be prepared. You're going to hear from us on it. I do want to wrap up and kind of pivot away to something that I didn't get the time to talk too much about while you were gone. I just looked at your weekly update on the gold to Bitcoin ratio. And I noted last week the percentages that keep going in the same direction. What have you noticed? I haven't had a chance to look at your post that you just put up here.
Yeah, so it's been 72 days since we've been tracking the gold to Bitcoin ratio. And we started tracking it when kinetic warfare broke out in Iran. And the whole idea in tracking this is usually Bitcoin is a risk off asset and gold is Bitcoin is a risk on asset, right? Gold is a risk off asset. So when risk went up, you would have expected that gold's dollar denominated price would follow and go up. But that's not what's been happening. In fact, since that time, Bitcoin is up since February 28th, when we started tracking this, Bitcoin is up 23 to 24%, and gold is still down 10 to 11%. That's a 34 point spread in favor of Bitcoin. And so what I continue to believe, and we're witnessing and observing, is that during times of geopolitical escalation, global instability, persistent uncertainty, gold is losing ground relative to Bitcoin. And I think that just goes to the fundamental properties of what Bitcoin is. Instant settlement, it's borderless, it's hard to confiscate, it's liquid in 24/7 markets, it's decentralized, it's neutral infrastructure, it's money for your enemies. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, we saw news that Iran was accepting Bitcoin for passage through the Strait of Hormuz, which was just a historic thing to see. So I don't know. I think it's a sign that, again, risk is mispriced everywhere, and people do not understand the inherent value of what Bitcoin is because of its properties. And Bitcoin may just be emerging as a risk-off asset in this environment. I mean, we've seen the S&P 500 and the NASDAQ and the broader stock market indices make new all-time highs. They're just skyrocketing up. And yet Bitcoin is still sort of in this mid-range correction, which is interesting to see, because perhaps when stuff gets dicey and risk goes up, we'll see the stock market correct more than Bitcoin. That's my prediction. I think you are going to start to see Bitcoin decouple from traditional risk on assets over time as this asset class emerges and matures and people understand the significant importance of it as a neutral form of currency. So we'll keep tracking this for the viewers and monitoring it because I think it's a fascinating indicator.
I appreciate that you do that too. And I just recently, my favorite Bitcoin commentator, Peter Schiff, had made his own post, and he's cherry picking the data, obviously, because he doesn't want to pick from a world global event like this Iran conflict starting. He'll pick it from whatever works to his benefit, and he'll talk about where it is year to date. And that gap, because of what's happening since February 28th, is closing. And eventually it'll surpass that and he'll be wrong yet again and he'll pivot to another comment. But I appreciate you doing this every week because it's interesting to see how it's just compounding over time. And like you said, people are making the choice with their assets on where they're putting their money to store it. And it seems like a winner's being picked. And I'm curious to see how that continues on, especially whenever we reach a point where we think the conflict is like over or resolved. What happens after that? That'll be curious to see that too. So yeah, I'm with you. We'll keep tracking that. So want to wrap up one more thing for all of our viewers. You may have noticed that this episode's on a different channel. So we just launched our own branded channel for the Bitcoin Beat and a new X account to follow it too as well. So we're no longer posting the videos on our personal accounts. And I got to be honest, starting over with like 0 subscribers and 0 followers to get the message out and have our same viewership, it's hard. So I'm asking you for a favor, and it's free. If you're on YouTube, go to YouTube and subscribe to the new channel for our Bitcoin Beat. If you're on X, give us a follow. Both those things are free and they help us more than you can understand. Help us get ourselves kind of back on our feet, and you can follow all of our new content on there. And Jeff and I will be posting not only these weekly episodes, but also our interview series, which we have a couple interviews planned for the works, one coming up here hopefully in a week, and then a really big name, which I've mentioned to some people locally that we're trying to schedule out. Some really exciting stuff, and it helps if you can help us. So this will be the only time I ask you sincerely, please take 20 seconds, go subscribe on YouTube, and then follow us on our X account. Links will be below on both the X post and our YouTube post, so you can find it. And Jeff, since you've been on the road, I know you got one more thing you're going to recently. Any takeaways from the last week or two that you want to share or give any insights to the viewer or to me? Because I know you and I haven't talked much in the last week.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. I'll just say this. I think we're still very early in this entire space. Despite the fact that the suits have shown up and the institutions are here, there's still a lot of misunderstanding around what Bitcoin is and what is the significant importance of it. And there's a lot of financialization being built on top of it. And in many cases, it seems like certain firms and companies are trying to, put a square peg through a round hole. And we know that Bitcoin was designed with absolute finite scarcity. It wasn't designed for a credit and debt-based economy. I think we will see some success in certain examples of how these different monetary systems merge. But at the same time, I think there are going to be some lessons along the way, and just be prepared for that. And if you're a retail investor just getting into this space, start with Bitcoin and remember the 2 most important rules. Number 1, don't ever tell anybody how many Bitcoin you have. Number 2, not your keys, not your coins. Learn how to self-custody, period.
Absolutely. And if you don't have any Bitcoin, get off of 0. But if you do have Bitcoin, keep stacking sats. We'll see you guys again next week. Take care.
Bye.